On the morning of November 2nd, 1944, as black smoke poured from the nose of his burning P-51 Mustang, Bruce Carr did not yet know that he was about to enter aviation legend. But the decisions he would make that day, alone, wounded, and deep behind enemy lines, were shaped years earlier, long before the war, long before Europe, long before anyone outside a small town in upstate New York had ever heard his name. To understand why Bruce Carr would later attempt something no American pilot had ever done, we must begin not with a stolen German fighter, but with a boy who learned to fly before he was old enough to vote, at a moment when the world itself was learning how deadly the sky could be. Bruce Ward Carr was born on January 28, 1924, in Union Springs, New York, a quiet farming community near Cayuga Lake. The town was small, conservative, and deeply rooted in the rhythms of rural America. Like many boys of the interwar generation, Carr grew up during the Great Depression, in a household where hard work was expected and nothing was wasted. There was nothing in his early life that suggested fame or notoriety. No military lineage, no aviation dynasty. Just a boy, farmland, and open sky. Everything changed in 1939. That year, at just 15 years old, Bruce Carr took control of an airplane for the first time. The timing was more than coincidence. In September 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and the world plunged into war. In Europe, air power was already proving decisive, Stukas screaming over cities, fighters dueling above columns of troops. In America, the war still felt distant, but the age of aviation had clearly arrived. Carr did not learn to fly through a military program or a formal flight school. Instead, he learned the old-fashioned way, from a local civilian pilot named Earl, a crop duster who flew a fabric-covered biplane low over New York farmland. Earl recognized something unusual in the teenage Carr: instinct. The boy understood the airplane almost immediately. He didn't just follow instructions, he felt the controls. By the end of that first summer, Carr was already logging hours that many Army Air Corps cadets would not accumulate until much later. By the time he turned 16, Bruce Carr had amassed more flight time than most men twice his age who dreamed of becoming pilots. He flew whenever he could, in all conditions, absorbing lessons that no classroom could teach: how wind behaves near the ground, how engines sound when something is wrong, how an aircraft talks to a pilot who knows how to listen. These experiences would later save his life. On September 3rd, 1942, with the United States fully committed to World War II, Carr enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces. He was 18 years old. When his flight training application was reviewed, it caught immediate attention. Logged flight hours mattered, especially early in the war, when the USAF was expanding faster than it could train pilots. Even more remarkable, Carr's primary instructor turned out to be the same man who had taught him to fly as a teenager. Earl had joined the service as well, seeing Carr's civilian flight record, over 240 hours before entering military training. Earl personally recommended him for the Accelerated Aviation Cadet program. It was a rare endorsement, and it placed Carr on a fast track through training at a time when the air war over Europe was becoming increasingly brutal. By August 1943, Carr had earned his wings. By February 1944, he was in England, assigned to the 308th Fighter Squadron, 306th Third Fighter Group, 9th Air Force. He was barely 20 years old. His aircraft was the North American P-51 Mustang. By 1944, the Mustang was already changing the course of the war. Earlier American daylight bombing campaigns had suffered catastrophic losses. In October 1943, during the infamous Schweinfurt-Regensburg missions, the 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers in a single day. Without long-range fighter escort, B-17s and B-24s were vulnerable prey for the Luftwaffe. The P-51 changed that equation. With its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, laminar flow wings, and unprecedented range, over 1,600 miles with drop tanks, the Mustang could escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. It was fast, agile, heavily armed, and lethal. German pilots gave it an unflattering nickname, the long-nosed bastard. What mattered more was the result. Within months, the Luftwaffe began losing experienced pilots faster than they could be replaced. Carr fell in love with the Mustang immediately. The cockpit fit him perfectly. Visibility was excellent, controls were responsive. The aircraft rewarded aggressive flying, and Bruce Carr was nothing if not aggressive. He named his P-51 Angel's Playmate, unaware of the irony that in less than a year he would sit in a cockpit marked with German words and a swastika. Carr's first combat engagement came on March 8, 1944, spotting a Messerschmitt Bf 109 over Germany. he gave chase. The German pilot dove for the deck, skimming treetops at over 400 miles per hour. Carr followed, pushing his Mustang to its limits. When he fired, his first burst missed. The second clipped the Messerschmitt's wing. The German pilot panicked, pulled up too low, and bailed out. His parachute failed to deploy fully. He did not survive. Carr returned to base expecting recognition. Instead, he was reprimanded. His commanding officer called his pursuit reckless and over-aggressive. The kill was not officially credited. Technically, Carr had not destroyed the aircraft. The pilot had killed himself attempting to escape. Carr was transferred out of the unit. It was an early indication of something fundamental about Bruce Carr. Where others saw danger, he saw possibility. Where doctrine imposed limits, he saw suggestions. By May 1944, Carr joined the 353rd Fighter Squadron, 354th Fighter Group, the famed Pioneer Mustang Group, the first American unit to fly P-51s operationally in Europe. Among elite pilots, Carr found his place. On June 17, 1944, just 11 days after D-Day, he scored his first official aerial victory, sharing credit for an FW-190 destroyed over Normandy. Promotions followed quickly. By September, he was a second lieutenant. On September 12, 1944, during a strafing mission, Carr destroyed multiple German aircraft on the ground, then dove into a formation of 30 enemy fighters, shooting down 3 in 3 minutes. When his wingman was damaged, Carr abandoned further combat to escort him home, an act that earned him the Silver Star. By October 29, 1944, Bruce Carr had achieved ace status with 7.5 confirmed victories. He was 20 years old. 4 days later, his Mustang would fall out of the sky over Czechoslovakia, and the world would learn what kind of pilot Bruce Carr truly was. The mission, on November 2, 1944, began like dozens before it. By late autumn, the air war over Europe had shifted decisively in the Allies' favor, but it was no less dangerous. German airfields were being hunted relentlessly, strafed to deny the Luftwaffe the ability to regroup. That afternoon, Bruce Carr led his P-51 Mustang low over Czechoslovakia, part of a coordinated attack against a German base supporting operations on the Eastern Front. At 3:47 p.m., everything changed. Carr glanced at his engine instruments and felt his stomach tighten. The oil pressure needle was falling, fast. Then it hit zero. Almost immediately, black smoke began pouring from the cowling of his Mustang, trailing behind him like a funeral banner. Moments earlier, an 88mm flak shell had exploded near the aircraft. A fragment had punched through the engine compartment and severed the oil line. For the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, this was a death sentence. Without oil, the Merlin would seize in roughly 90 seconds. After that, the propeller would lock, turning into a 400-pound brake. The P-51 would become a glider with the aerodynamic qualities of a brick. Carr knew the math. Every Mustang pilot did. He had one option. Carr slid the canopy back, rolled the aircraft inverted, and dropped into open air. The cold hit instantly, brutal and unforgiving. At roughly 8,000 feet, his parachute deployed with a violent jerk. Below him stretched enemy territory in every direction. He drifted down behind German lines, nearly 200 miles east of the nearest Allied position. When he hit the frozen ground, the landing was hard. His ankle twisted sharply beneath him. Pain flared, white and immediate. It wasn't broken, but it was badly sprained. Carr gathered his parachute quickly, forcing himself to ignore the pain, and dragged the silk into the undergrowth, burying it beneath leaves and soil. A visible parachute was a death warrant. German patrols searched relentlessly for downed airmen, often arriving within minutes. Carr had no radio, no food, no water, no weapon beyond a Colt 45 pistol with 7 rounds. November nights in Central Europe routinely dropped below freezing. Survival statistics were grim. Allied intelligence estimated that American pilots shot down over occupied territory had roughly a 23% chance of evading capture and returning to friendly lines. The rest ended up in POW camps like Stalag Luft 3 or in unmarked graves. Carr understood the odds. He also understood German thinking. The airfield he had just attacked lay approximately 5 miles north of his landing site. German search parties would expect him to head south or west, toward the Allied lines. Carr did the opposite. He turned north, deeper into enemy territory. It was not a reckless decision. It was calculated. If he was going to survive, he needed supplies, food, water, information. An airfield offered all three. More importantly, it offered something else: opportunity. The first night, Carr moved slowly through forest, avoiding roads and open ground. He traveled after dark, resting during daylight hours. His flight suit provided little insulation. His ankle throbbed with every step. By the second day, thirst became unbearable. He found a stream and drank deeply, the water so cold it numbed his throat. At one point, he spotted a German patrol less than 200 yards away and lay motionless in a drainage ditch for over 2 hours while they passed. By the third day, hunger dominated his thoughts. He had eaten nothing. Simply staying warm was burning thousands of calories. His body began consuming itself for fuel. His strength ebbed. The pain in his ankle worsened. Reality closed in. Carr began to consider surrender. Among aviators, there was an unspoken code. Luftwaffe pilots were known, comparatively, to treat captured airmen according to the Geneva Convention. Carr knew men who had been held in Stalag Luft 3. They described monotony, boredom, hunger, but survival, Red Cross parcels, letters from home. It was not freedom, but it was life. Starving alone in a frozen forest was not heroic. It was foolish. On the fourth day, as afternoon light faded, Carr reached the edge of the German airfield. He concealed himself in a tree line overlooking the eastern perimeter. From there he could see hangars, fuel trucks, staff cars, and several aircraft, mostly Messerschmitt Bf-109s. His plan was simple. At first light, he would walk to the main gate, hands raised. Then something caught his attention. About 80 yards away, partially hidden beneath camouflage netting, sat a Focke-Wulf F-190. Two German mechanics worked beneath portable lights. Carr watched intently. They checked fuel levels. Full tanks. They ran the engine. The deep, unmistakable roar of the BMW 801 radial filling the night air. They tested magnetos, cycled the propeller, and completed what appeared to be a full pre-flight inspection. Then they shut the engine down, covered the cockpit, and walked away toward the hangars. The aircraft was ready to fly. Carr stared at the fighter, his mind racing. He had never flown a German aircraft. He did not speak German. He had no manual, no checklist, no idea where most of the controls were located. But he did know this. Airplanes were airplanes. Throttle, stick, rudder. Lift did not care what language was printed on the gauges. He waited until 3:00 a.m. The airfield was quiet, guarded by a skeleton crew. Carr crawled from cover and sprinted across open ground, 80 yards with nowhere to hide. His ankle screamed with pain, but he did not slow down. He reached the FW-190, climbed onto the wing, and slid into the cockpit. Inside, everything was foreign. Gothic German lettering, unfamiliar switches. The cockpit was tighter than the Mustang's, armored and cramped. His knees pressed against the instrument panel. But some things were universal. The control stick fit naturally into his hand. The throttle was on the left. Carr had 4 hours until sunrise. He used every minute. He traced wiring by touch, identified instruments by placement, airspeed, altimeter, engine gauges. He located the fuel selector, magnetos, and propeller controls. The starter was the mystery. Eventually, he found a T-shaped handle on the right side of the cockpit. He pulled it. Nothing. He pushed it forward. A mechanical whine filled the cockpit. An inertia starter. Carr let it wind up, counting seconds. Then he pulled the handle again. The BMW 801 coughed, then roared to life, shaking the aircraft violently. The sound was thunderous. Every German on the field would hear it. Carr shoved the throttle forward and aimed between two hangars. Ground crew emerged shouting, pointing. At 90 miles per hour, he pulled back. The FW-190 leapt into the air, clearing the hangar roofs by inches. Bruce Carr was airborne, alone, wounded, flying a stolen German fighter from the heart of enemy territory. The moment the wheels left the ground, Bruce Carr entered the most dangerous phase of his escape. He was flying an enemy aircraft, marked with black crosses and a swastika, with no radio, no navigation aids he fully understood, and no margin for error. Below him lay occupied Europe. Above him, the rapidly brightening pre-dawn sky. Behind him, an airfield that would soon be in chaos. The Focke-Wulf Fu-190 was nothing like the Mustang. Where the P-51 was sleek and graceful, the German fighter felt dense, muscular, almost aggressive. Its BMW 801 radial engine delivered nearly 700 horsepower, and even at low altitude, the aircraft surged forward with startling acceleration. The nose was heavier, the response sharper. The airplane wanted to fly fast and low. dangerously low. Carr's first priority was simple: survive the next 60 seconds. He pushed the aircraft down toward the treetops, barely 50 feet above the ground, flying west-southwest by instinct and rough compass alignment. At altitude, he would be visible to German radar stations and flak batteries. At treetop level, he would be invisible to radar and nearly impossible to target from the ground. This was flying at the edge of human reaction time. A single lapse of attention would send him cartwheeling through the forest at nearly 300 miles per hour. The Czechoslovakian countryside blurred beneath him, dark forest broken by fields and villages. Carr flew by feel, adjusting power and trim as he went, learning the aircraft one control at a time. He retracted the landing gear by trial, finding the correct lever only after several tense seconds. When the wheels locked into place, the aircraft gained speed instantly. The fuel gauge read full. The FW-190's range was roughly 500 miles. France lay less than half that distance away. For the first time since bailing out of his Mustang, Carr allowed himself a thin margin of hope. 45 minutes later, the horizon began to change. Forest gave way to farmland, then to the scarred terrain of the Western Front. Trenches, damaged roads, wrecked vehicles. Carr had reached Allied lines. That was when the shooting began. To American anti-aircraft gunners, the silhouette was unmistakable. A German fighter, flying low and fast toward friendly positions. Every doctrine manual said the same thing: shoot first. They did. Tracers arced up from the ground, bright red lines slicing past Carr's wings. He heard impacts, sharp metallic thuds against the fuselage. The aircraft shuddered, but held together. German engineering did not fail him now. Carr pushed even lower, skimming hedgerows at 20 feet. The propeller wash kicked up dust and debris from roads below. French civilians dove for cover. American soldiers fired rifles and machine guns at him. Later, Carr would joke that every 50 caliber gun in France took a shot at him that morning. At the time, there was nothing funny about it. He recognized the terrain ahead. A familiar airfield came into view, A-66, known as Sorconte, home of the 354th Fighter Group. His own unit. Carr lined up for approach without ceremony. There would be no radio calls, no landing pattern. The anti-aircraft crews were already tracking him, preparing heavier weapons. He reached for the landing gear control. Nothing happened. He pulled the lever again. Still nothing. He searched frantically for a backup system, an emergency release, anything. The FW-190's landing gear operated hydraulically through a selector valve system unfamiliar to him. Carr did not know this. He was pulling the wrong handle. Below him, American gunners were loading 40mm Bofors guns. There was no more time. Carr made a decision that likely saved his life. He would belly land the aircraft. He lined up alongside the main runway, lowered the flaps, one system he had successfully identified, and cut the throttle. The aircraft descended rapidly. At 90 miles per hour, the FW-190 slammed into the grass, skidding violently. Dirt and debris exploded around him as the fighter slid more than 300 yards before grinding to a halt. Silence followed. Carr sat motionless for a moment, stunned but alive. Then, rifles surrounded the cockpit. Military police shouted orders, weapons trained on him. They expected a German pilot. They expected resistance. The canopy slid back. A mud-covered American climbed onto the wing, torn flight suit hanging loose, face gaunt from hunger and exhaustion. "I'm Captain Carr," he said. "This is my squadron." No one believed him. Carr had been missing for 4 days. He was presumed dead or captured. Instead, he had just landed a German fighter on an American airfield. The MPs kept their rifles raised until a staff car arrived. Colonel George Bickle, commanding officer of the 354th Fighter Group, stepped out and surveyed the scene. The wrecked FW-190, the armed guards, the emaciated pilot standing in the grass. "Where in the hell have you been?" Bickle asked. "And what have you been doing now?" The story spread rapidly through the Army Air Forces. The downed pilot who stole an enemy fighter. The only American in the European theater to take off in a P-51 and return in a Focke-Wulf. Intelligence officers examined the aircraft carefully before it was destroyed, extracting valuable data on German systems. Bruce Carr became a quiet legend, but the war was not finished with him yet. 5 months after stealing a German fighter and flying it home, Bruce Carr was back where he belonged, at the front of a formation, high over a collapsing Third Reich. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self, but it was still dangerous. Germany's fuel shortages, destroyed factories and pilot losses had crippled its air force. yet pockets of resistance remained. New aircraft variants, the Messerschmitt Bf-109 G10 and the Focke-Wulf F-190 D9, were technically superb, fast, and heavily armed. What Germany lacked now was not machines, but experienced men to fly them. On April 2, 1945, First Lieutenant Bruce Carr was leading a flight of 4 P-51 Mustangs on a routine reconnaissance mission near Schweinfurt, Germany. They were flying at approximately 15,000 feet when Carr noticed movement above them, contrails, glinting wings, shifting shadows against the clouds. German fighters, not a handful, not a squadron, dozens. Carr quickly counted at least 60 aircraft stacked in altitude between 18,000 and 25,000 feet. A massive formation of mixed Bf-109s and FW-190s, likely assembling to intercept Allied bombers. They had altitude advantage, numerical superiority, tactical dominance. Every training manual ever written was clear. Disengage immediately. 4 American fighters attacking 60 enemy aircraft was suicide. Standard procedure dictated breaking contact, radioing the sighting, and escaping at maximum speed. Survival, not heroics, was the mission. Carr keyed his microphone. Engaging. There was no hesitation from his wingmen. They had flown with Carr long enough to understand what that word meant when it came from him. Bruce Carr did not bluff. The 4 Mustangs climbed directly into the German formation. The Luftwaffe pilots were caught completely off guard. An attack from below, by such a small force, made no tactical sense. Confusion rippled through the formation as aircraft broke, turned, and scattered. Carr used the chaos with deadly precision. He slipped behind a Messerschmitt and fired a short burst. The German fighter disintegrated. He rolled, acquired a second target, an FW-190, and destroyed it in seconds. Carr did not linger. He fired, moved, fired again. Energy tactics perfected over months of combat flowed instinctively now. A third aircraft fell, then a fourth, then a fifth. In less than 3 minutes, Bruce Carr shot down 5 German fighters. His wingmen added 10 more. 15 enemy aircraft destroyed. 4 American pilots. 0 losses. When their ammunition ran dry, Carr led his flight home. The surviving German fighters, 45 of them, scattered in all directions, abandoning the intercept mission entirely. It was one of the most extraordinary air combats of the European War. On April 9, 1945, Bruce Carr was promoted to captain. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor. The citation read, in part, that he had completely disregarded his personal safety and the enemy's overwhelming numerical superiority. In a single day, Carr became the last American ace of the European theater. No US pilot would match his feat before Germany surrendered a month later. By war's end, Bruce Carr had flown 172 combat missions and accumulated between 14 and 15 confirmed aerial victories. Records differ depending on how shared kills were counted, along with numerous ground targets destroyed. He was 21 years old. For most men, that would have been the defining chapter of a lifetime. For Bruce Carr, it was only the beginning. He remained in uniform after World War II, as the United States entered the jet age. Carr joined the Acrojets, America's first jet-powered aerobatic demonstration team, flying the Lockheed F-80 Shooting Star. It was a new world of speed, altitude, and technology, but Carr adapted as he always had, by learning the aircraft to its limits. When war came again, this time in Korea, Carr flew 57 combat missions in the F-86 Sabre, with the 336th Fighter Interceptor Squadron. Jet combat bore little resemblance to the dogfights of World War II, yet the fundamentals, situational awareness, discipline, aggression, remained unchanged. Carr later commanded the squadron from 1955 to 1956, wearing the silver eagles of a colonel. Then came Vietnam. By the mid-1960s, Bruce Carr was 44 years old, an age when most fighter pilots had long since left the cockpit. He volunteered anyway. Flying the F-100 Super Sabre, Carr completed 286 combat missions over Southeast Asia, close air support, strike missions, dangerous low-level work, eerily reminiscent of his Mustang days. 3 wars, 3 generations of aircraft, over 500 combat missions. Bruce Carr retired from the United States Air Force in 1973. On April 25, 1998, in St. Cloud, Florida, Colonel Bruce Ward Carr died of prostate cancer at the age of 74. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 64, Grave 6922. His headstone lists his rank, his decorations, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross with clusters, Air Medal with clusters, Purple Heart, and the wars he fought: World War II, Korea, Vietnam. It does not mention the Focke-Wulf. It does not mention 4 days in a frozen forest, or a belly landing under fire, or rifles pointed at his chest by his own men. Some stories do not fit on stone. There are 2 ways to remember Bruce Carr. One is the legend, the American pilot who stole a German fighter from an active enemy airfield and flew it home. The other is the record, the ace, the squadron commander, the man who led 4 aircraft against 60 and won. Both are true. But the essence of Bruce Carr's story is simpler. In November 1944, stranded behind enemy lines, the rational choice was surrender. In April 1945, facing overwhelming odds, the rational choice was retreat. Carr chose neither. In 1997, 1 year before his death, Bruce Carr flew one last time. Invited to an air show at Kermit Wick's Fantasy of Flight Museum in Florida, the 73-year-old arrived in a P-51 Mustang. He flew low and fast over the crowd, 300 knots, 50 feet off the deck, the same profile he had used half a century earlier when escaping in a stolen German fighter. After landing, someone asked him what he had been thinking up there. Carr shrugged. "Same thing I always thought," he said. "What's the airplane capable of? What am I capable of? Let's find out." That was Bruce Carr, not fearless, not reckless, simply unwilling to accept that his options were limited to the obvious ones. And that, more than any stolen aircraft or tally of victories, is why his story still matters.